Hey everyone, it's Terry. Today we're going to talk about how to make flying geese. Now many of you are quilters and you may know this, and some of you may want to quilt or you want to add this beautiful unit to the outside of a pillow or a table runner so that you can create a really traditional look. What happens when you add flying geese unit to the outside border? You might have something that looks like this. You can also take those units and add a couple of squares to it, and this is 4 flying geese units to create stars. So it's probably one of the nicest units that you'll make in quilting, but it's also one that gives some people a little bit of aggravation. The traditional method of sewing a flying geese unit is called sew and flip. And with this, if this was going to be a 2" by 4" unit, what you're going to do is add a 1/2 inch to each of those measurements. So you need to cut a rectangle that is 2½ by 4½, and then your square, which is a smaller measurement to 2 inches, you'll make that a 2½ inch square. On the sew and flip method, what you do is you'll draw a diagonal line, then you'll sew just inside the outside corner of this line, and you'll fold this back and flip it, which is very similar to making a half square triangle. And then what happens, if you sewn well, this is all going to line up, and then you'll trim a 1/4 inch seam. You'll do the same thing for the other side. Now, if you don't sew well, you're going to end up with a unit that looks like this. It doesn't have a good ample 1/4 inch up here on the top. So make sure that you measure well and you cut your fabric well and your sewing is good. And for that reason, what happens is a lot of people will create a larger unit, then they'll cut it down. Now the next method that I'm going to show you is a method I like the least. In that particular method, what you do is you start out with the larger square, and then you cut that larger square in quadrants, and it ends up as a piece that's similar to this right here. Then what you're going to do is you're going to add those triangles to each side of that unit and sew it together. The first thing you should notice about this unit, and let me turn it around this way so it's facing the camera, is that this particular unit is not dealing with all straighted grain. Right here you have bias. Anytime you introduce bias, you're also introducing room for mistakes. So this is my least preferred. I'm going to show it to you, but I wouldn't use it. So here I have a little jumper strip, and I've sewn this on, but this needs to be lined up. You see those corners are square, and this tip is exposed over the end because that's what's going to hold the other part of your flying geese unit. We'll set that one aside, and we'll talk about the method that I like the most. Most people, when they're making a flying geese unit, they're making multiples. There's a method called the no waste method. In the no waste, if you were making a 2 by 4 inch, what you do is you create actually 4 different flying geese units by taking a large square where you take your largest measurement, if this is the size you want it to be, and you add 1 1/4 inches to it. So this would become a 5 1/4 by 5 1/4 square. Then your smaller square, which is 2 inches, you add 7/8 inches to each side of it. So that becomes 2 7/8 by 2 7/8. Now with this particular method, what you do is you take a ruler, and that ruler, I use one that is a 1/4 inch ruler like this, made by Fons and Porter, and you'll take this fabric and those squares, and you're going to draw a line on each side of 2 of your squares, and you'll pin them together just so that they're like this. You're going to stitch along this line on exactly on that line across both pieces of the fabric. Then what you'll do after this is sewn is you're going to cut this right down the center on the diagonal end, and you'll end up with a block that looks like this. So here's half of that unit that I showed you right here. So here it is. And now I've created this portion. This portion is often referred to as the little fox or the heart, depending on what you're using. Now this needs to be ironed so that these pieces come back. And when you iron it like that, it's going to look like this. But you're going to take another square and you're going to sew it adding a 1/4 inch from the center, and you'll sew it in this direction. When this gets cut in half, you then have 2 flying geese units. So when you add the square to this one, you'll end up with a total of 4 flying geese units. And that's how I created these perfect little flying geese units right here. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a ruler that I really like. And what I like about this ruler is it adds some fabric for the cut, and it actually has 3 different methods, and that includes the sew and flip. It also has a method for that traditional where you're cutting your square into 4 diagonals that I don't like, and then it has that last method which I call the no waste. And in the Creative Grids world they have another name for it. So here's the Creative Grids ruler, and I want you to see what the packaging looks like. You'll get this little piece of paper with it. Now if you take your phone and your camera, you can scan this, and this will take you to a YouTube video. I have to tell you, I had to watch that video a couple of times. You may not have to, because I didn't really understand all the different directions on this ruler. And the reason I didn't is the 3 methods I just showed you, each of those are there. So the sew and flip method is called let me zoom you in, is called the flip back or fold back. So that's where I just took the rectangle, like if you were making 1 unit, and this is what is called the flip back or fold back. Now the difference is where I added just a 1/2 inch to the width and the height of that rectangle, they're actually adding another 1/4 inch. And the reason for that is when you trim this up, you can trim a little bit of excess fabric, and you end up with really, really small pieces of fabric, no thicker than this. And so you don't have a whole lot of wasted fabric. So that's the flip or fold back. And when you're doing that, what you're going to use is the corner of the ruler that's called the trim to. Now you see these are rectangles. Let me turn it this way so you can see it. And you can see that this will make a 1 1/2 by 1 unit, a 1 by 2, 1 1/2 by 3, 2 by 4, 2 1/2 by 5, 3 by 6, 3 1/2 by 7, and even a 4 by 8. So this makes several sizes or multiple sizes. The second method on this is that method that I told you I don't like. And here it is. This is called the Traditional Crosscut. Now I'm not going to use this, but I am going to show you that there's 2 sections of the ruler that it shows with this that you will use on the third method, which is similar to the no waste. And you can see right here, let me move my hand, that it says trim to. Let me adjust the camera so you make sure you see it. It says trim to. So what you'll do is you're going to line up your unit to the lines on the ruler, and you'll notice that they form a V. So let's look at that on one of the completed units. That's one of the small units that I completed. So I'll grab one of those. We'll set it down, and what we're going to do is we're going to look at the unit this way. So first of all, we need to go to trim 1. So we'll start out with trim 1. Your unit will be facing this direction. So what you're going to do is, looking at the measurement of the block you're making, this lines up perfectly into that V, and you trim around it. And the same is true, you'll rotate it 180 degrees and you'll use the trim to portion. So you go to the size of the unit, you line it up, and you're going to trim these 2 outer corners. Now the nice thing about this is for all your different size units, here are the measurements right here. So to make a 2x4, you actually have to cut 1 block that's 5 3/4 inches and 4 blocks that are 3 1/4. And that's going to allow you to create the unit that's like this. So we'll create 4 units, we'll use those measurements, we'll sew down this seam and down this seam, then we'll cut this in half through the center section on the diagonal, and we'll end up with a unit that looks like this piece. We'll take this and fold it back and press it, don't iron. Remember, we're dealing with bias, and it is going to overlap right here, so that's okay. Then we're going to take the other square, we're going to place it on here, and we're going to sew on these 2 seams. We'll take this and cut it, and then we're going to end up with a perfect flying geese unit that is going to look similar to this, depending on the size you select. So again, that's the Creative Grids ruler. Now there are all kinds of things that you can get to make flying geese, and there are other brands of rulers. You can also buy the paper. This is the flying geese paper. This makes a 2x4 flying geese. It's the finished size. You can also use a ruler that's called the wing clipper ruler, and here it is in its packaging. There's also one by Kimberly Imo that's called the Easy Quilting Flying Geese. I think this one is actually making more of those triangles that are cut on the bias, so I don't particularly care for this one as much, but I would read the instructions and look at her website just to make sure. And then I also have a Quilting a Day, which I have used the larger size of this to make flying geese, and this is actually a very good method. What I really like about the Creative Grids rulers though is that the back of the rulers have they're no slip. So what you're going to see on the back of the ruler is this is rough, so that etching actually helps you secure that fabric so it's not going to move. It's going to hold everything in place for you to get your job done. I'm Terry Maffitt. I hope this video has been helpful to you. If you like my videos, please like and subscribe to my channel, and you'll find these products at your dealers. And please shop at your dealers, because that's the reason why we are so fortunate to be able to sew with our lovely machines, is that we have dealers who are purchasing the inventory to help us sew. You can join me on Facebook in my Facebook group, Just Stitching with the Brother Luminaire. I hope to see you there. Thank you very much and have a great day.